take you over to the White House because we're getting new video of President Donald Trump's meeting with British Prime Minister. Let's listen in.
This is the original. This is the original in many ways. And it's a great honor to have Winston Churchill back. Well, thank you, Mr. President. We're very keen to accept this back. Thank you.
Thank you, President.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Some kind remarks there between Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May and President Trump. And that was video reported just moments ago in the Oval Office at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. They will head to the East Room to hold a joint news conference. We can also tell you that President Trump spoke by phone with Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto earlier today for about an hour. Yesterday, President Peña Nieto canceled a meeting with President Trump scheduled for next week over Mr. Trump's border wall.
The United Nations aid chief has warned that a child under the age of 10 is dying every 10 minutes of preventable causes in Yemen and has called for an immediate ceasefire there. A Saudi-led coalition has been conducting airstrikes in the region for almost 2 years. UK humanitarian organisations Save the Children travel to Yemen and observe the drastic conditions. A warning: you may find some of the following images disturbing.
كانت حياتي طبيعية، كنا نخرج بأمان، لا ما نحناش خايفين من أي شيء. أنا صدق أكره الطيارة لأنه إحنا رايح المدرسة متخوفة، أخرج وأنا متخوفة، أدخل وأنا متخوفة. ضربوا مدرستنا لما كنا هناك، ضربوني يعني قذيفة لي، كنت بالفصل هذا يصيحت ما قدرتش أخرج، كنت اللي اخترقت. بعد ما 13 ما حد كان يدخل لعندي. كان في معنا أخ صغير عمره 4 سنين، عمه مش اللي طه، ما كانش داير ما فيه مش حياة. بعد شيء طبي وتبصر هناك كأنه مليان شرايط براسه، مليان شرايط. افتجعنا على طفل تهارب وبعضهم تجاروا.
Well, Mark Kay, a humanitarian advocacy advisor for Save the Children, says Yemen is now facing the world's most severe humanitarian crisis.
There's been a flagrant disregard for the protection of civilians, for international humanitarian law by all parties to the conflict. I think that's really important to stand out, is that both sides of the conflict are not condoning the way they should be fighting this war. And what this means, though, is that behind those numbers there are huge numbers of children, of innocent civilians who are being killed, maimed, being lifelong disfigurement because of these breaches. The situation is not only getting worse, but what we're not actually seeing is much improvements since I've last been in there in terms of working towards a peace process, a durable solution. It's the largest humanitarian crisis in the world right now, 18 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. I think there is a problem in terms of the amount of coverage that is coming out of Yemen so that people can really see the human impact of this war.
Well, the Saudi-led coalition is continuing its airstrikes, and one of its biggest weapon suppliers is the UK. Britain has sold £3.3 billion worth of arms to Riyadh since March 2015, when the conflict in Yemen began. That includes more than £2 billion worth of warplanes, helicopters and drones. Saudi Arabia now has twice as many UK-made warplanes than the Royal Air Force. The question of Britain's arms sales to the Saudis has been raised in Parliament once again.
Thousands of civilians have been killed in Yemen, including a large number by the Saudi Air Force.
That's right.
And they've done that using British-built planes with pilots who are trained by British instructors, who are dropping British-made bombs and are coordinated by the Saudis in the presence of British military advisors.
Will the Prime Minister agree to launch immediately an inquiry and a full review into the arms export licences to Saudi Arabia and suspend those arms sales until that review has been concluded?
Our arms exports are carefully controlled and we are backing the legitimate government of the Yemen.
Well, Mark Kay again says arms sales should be suspended because they may be breaking UK law.
I mean, UK law on arms is that if there's any clear risk that any weapons they sell might be used in a breach of international humanitarian law, then they should suspend those arms sales. What we'd argue is that there have been numerous verified accounts of grave violations. That's attacks on hospitals, attacks on schools, where there have been breaches. Our understanding would be that there is a clear risk that they should be suspending those arms sales. It's important that people are held accountable for when they breach.
To northern Syria now, where battles are escalating between al-Qaeda-linked terrorists and militants from other factions. The first to attack were rebels from the Fatah al-Sham front, previously known as the al-Nusra militants. The group issued a statement saying its attacks on opposition groups were to prevent a conspiracy. In response, one of the major militant groups, Ahrar al-Sham, said it's ready to fight back. Tensions inside the anti-Assad forces are escalating as various militant factions decide to turn on each other and go head-to-head, as Daniel Hawkins explains.
The Syrian civil war is a melee of dozens of fronts and factions with different objectives. We hear about the key flashpoints, Al-Bab, Damascus, Aleppo. But let's focus for a minute on the province of Idlib, the only one in western Syria where the government has almost no military presence. As you can see, it's a patchwork of armed groups with fluid allegiances. They can be united one week and at war with each other the next. It's also a microcosm of Syria to which, following truce agreements, rebels have been transported from all the surrounding areas. It's a picture of what the rest of the country could look like without the Syrian army and Assad government. What does that mean? Well, separating moderate rebels from terrorists has been a key tenet of Russian policy in Syria. With Assad as a common enemy, there seemed to be some unity among contending factions. But take him out of the equation, and true colours start to emerge. The recent chaos in Idlib has proven just that. As the prospect of a political process and resolution becomes more realistic, infighting between extremist groups and more moderate factions has intensified in the region.
When you look at the conference that just happened in Kazakhstan, and you see, the governments have come together, they were able to essentially speak with one voice, and you compare that to what's going on in Idlib, and you basically have a cacophony of Salafist rebel groups of varying degrees of extremeness who are now fighting each other. The main divide in Idlib seems to be between the Al-Qaeda affiliate Nusra there and slightly more moderate groups. And then there are groups that are sort of in between in terms of how moderate they are. I do think that this conference has exacerbated tensions on the ground between the rebel groups. And in a way, this is what Russia has been demanding, is for the more moderate rebels to try to disentangle themselves.
A clearer picture is now emerging of which groups really are willing and able to participate in a negotiated solution, and those who put ideology above all else. A natural way of separating the wheat from the chaff.
Separating so-called moderate rebels from jihadists and militants in Syria has been a bit of a problem the old US administration either seemed unable or reluctant to solve.
We recognize that, in places like Aleppo and elsewhere, that there's a mixing or commingling, whatever you want to call it, and that we need to work more closely together to disentangle, where these groups are mixing with known terrorist groups. These rebel groups have to know that there is no military solution for them, that there is no way that they can win by taking up arms, and this is where the Americans have to come in, because not only must Donald Trump's administration not try to impede this process, but it must start putting pressure on US regional allies by continuing to funnel weapons and money and support to the rebel groups. So this is where the US can come in under Trump. It can choke off this regional support.